Good morning, all of you. I'm Dr. Suraj Patil, and today I'm trying to discuss about the AngularJS framework. So first of all, we'll see what is AngularJS. So AngularJS is a open source framework to create a single page application. Basically, this framework was being designed by the Google, and it tries to minimize the number of round trips happening to the web server, basically. So if you see the need of AngularJS, it is used to minimize the number of postback events done to the server to reload the page on the browser. Second thing is that it tries to minimize the number of round trips of the traditional web programming model, and it is used to design a single page application. So this is the basic, you can see the architecture of AngularJS framework. So we have the three basic components. One is the controller, then view, and the model. So basically, the user is trying to interact with the application using some sort of events. So these events can be a click event, or it can be a onload event. So any kind of events which are being done by the user, those events are being captured by the controller, and then they are being sent to the view and the model. So basically, the controller will act as an intermediate component between the view and the model. So the functionality of the view and the model is being controlled by the controller, basically. So model is something which is being used to store some data, basically. So what are the data that is required by the controller? That data is being stored inside the model, and it is being processed by the controller, and then it is given to the view. And the view is nothing but the, you can say, you can call it as a user interface, which tries to render the data coming from the model with the help of controller, basically. So to get the basic idea how this MVC architecture is going to work, so as I told you, there are three components. One is the model, one is the view, and one is the controller, basically. So if you see in this case, the user is trying to send some request to the controller. The controller is going to handle the request to the view and to the model, basically. So it tries to take some data from the model, and then it tries to bind this data to the view with the help of view, basically. So it gets a presentation. So from the view, it gets a presentation. Dynamically, it tries to render some data, whereas from model, it gets some data, basically. And then this data and the presentation, which is called as UI component, they are being bind with the help of controller, basically. And then the final response is being sent back to the client. So to get the example of this, if you see, so suppose the user wants to get the details about the cats. Okay, so he sends a request get cats to the controller. Now the controller is going to send this request to the model, basically, because inside the model we are trying to store some data. So in the model we can fire the query like SQL query select star from cats. So we get some data from the model. Again, that data is being sent to the controller, basically. Once the controller is going to receive some data from the model, the controller is going to send a request to the view to get some UI component, basically. So it gets a UI component, that is a get a cat presentation. That is, this is nothing but the UI component that it gets from the view. And then once the controller is having a data as well as the UI component, then it makes a decision. So if success, it will display the, you can say, the data coming from the model inside the view. And finally, the entire data is being sent back to the user, basically. So this is a typical, you can say, the representation or the flow of the how the MVC architecture is going to work. Basically, MVC architecture is a, you can say, it's a new kind of architecture, because in the traditional web programming, we were having the client server kind of communication, or you can say the traditional web programming model was about the client server, you can say, kind of model. But now, in which the client gets blocked, basically, whenever it sends a request to the server. So until it gets a response from the server, the client gets blocked. Whereas in case of MVC architecture, there is no need for the client to get blocked. So client can send a request to the controller, and then it can controller can send a request to the server basically. So by the time it gets data from the server, again the new request can be sent by the you can say by the user to the controller or to the server basically. So most of the tasks are being happening at the background process, and this is a very important, you can say, the aspect of using the, you can say, the MVC architecture. So MVC architecture, as I told you, it contains basically three components. One is the model, one is the view, and one is the controller. So model is being used to store some data that is required uh, by the view or by the controller basically. So it can be a database, it can be a normal, you can say, the application variables. So normally the model is being assigned to the controller or to the view with the help of directives. So model has a directive called as ng model basically. In the case of you can say AngularJS architecture. So ng model directive is being used to store some data to the inside the model. The view component is being used to display the data coming from the model, and the controller is going to act as a you can say the intermediate, you can say a layer which is going to handle the interaction between the model and the view basically. So that entire, you can say, the interaction that is happening between the view and the model is being controlled by the controller basically. That's why it's called as controller. So let's see one you can say small example how we can create a, you can say, the first AngularJS application. So if you see in this this is the interface of the, you can say, where I can run my AngularJS code. So the first thing is that we need to include what? The AngularJS framework. So this http://googleapis.com/angular.mean.js. So this is the framework of AngularJS. So if you want to design the AngularJS kind of application, always you need to include this framework. The next thing is that we need to create the instance of AngularJS application. So we are writing ng-app equal to blank. So currently we are not trying to give any name to the AngularJS application, but since it's the AngularJS application, we need to include this directive. So this directive will tell the compiler that you are creating your application is not the normal application. Now it's a single page application, and it's a kind of AngularJS application basically. So now let's define one label, user name colon. Now what I'm doing here, I'm trying to define the one input field. So input type equal to text, and then I'm trying to define one model. Now always the model is a part of input controls. Okay, so model is a part of input controls. So in this case, input text box is input control, which is being used to store some data basically. So for this input control, we define the model. So I'm writing here ng-model, and to this model I will give some name of the application variable, that is I can say A. So A is a model now, and in other words I can say that A is nothing but it's an application variable which is going to store some data that we enter on the input field, and then end of the input field. Now what are the data I'm trying to put up in this, you can say, in this application variable or in this model? Okay, that will be get stored in this A basically, and then the data of the model I'm displaying here in the paragraph. So I'll write here h1 tag h1, and then I'm going to use here one AngularJS expression. So anything that you enclose between the opening and closing brackets, curly braces, that is called as AngularJS expression, and it is going to evaluate the value of the application variable. In this case, the application variable is nothing but our model, and the value of the model is we are trying to evaluate using this expression. So this is called as AngularJS expression. Okay, so I can give one more you can say example. So I can say I can write here your value, okay, your value or your age, I can say your age colon, I can say H1, and now I'm writing here 20 plus 2, 20 plus 2. So again, if you see in this case, 20 plus 2 is expression. So what I'm getting in this case value as 22. So anything, it may be a model, it may be a simple mathematical expression, anything, or it can be object also. Anything that you put up between the opening and closing braces of the HTML tag that you are trying to evaluate as a AngularJS expression. So this, and then I'm trying to end the end of my application. So here my application is going to end. Okay, so basically if you see in this case, so if you see in this case, this line, okay, body ng app will start the AngularJS application. So currently we are not given any kind of name to this application. Then we have defined one model as A, and then we are trying to evaluate the value of this model using AngularJS expression. And here I written some mathematical expression, and then end of the application. This is the end of the application. Now if I run this code, now if you see in this case, so let me give you one BR tag. Just take it to the next line. So if you see in this case, now in this case, what is the value I'm trying to enter here? So if you see in this case, so when I enter some value here, Suraj, okay, so that value will be get stored inside the model A, and then here your name, okay, your name, I'm writing here what AngularJS expression A basically. So the value of this A will be getting evaluated here now. And if you see in this case again, this is called as, this is a expression for a, you can say application variable. So what is the value of this variable? The name basically, okay. And if you see in this case, this is a mathematical expression 20 plus 2. So what I'm getting here 22 basically. So this kind of, you can say this is the first application where the value of the text box is being stored inside the model, and then we're trying to bind the value of the model inside the view. So this is called as, you can say, a basic simple application of AngularJS framework. So in this case, in this program, we are not using any kind of controller basically. But you can see in this case, here we have a model. So you can say the A is our model because it stores some data that we enter here basically. And if you see the value of the model, we are trying to render inside the view basically. So this H1 is our view basically. And if you see dynamically, we are able to get the value. Okay, so as soon as I enter some data inside the model, the view gets changed. So it's a dynamic updation which is happening right now, which is not possible in the case of HTML or CSS for the JavaScript basically, additional scripting language. But with the help of HTML code itself, what we have done basically, without writing any kind of JavaScript code, what we have done basically, we are trying to make the entire, you can say, HTML tags as a dynamic. So coming back to the, you can say, model view controller basically. So coming back to the architecture again. So if you see in this case, so just now what we are designing a basic application of the AngularJS in which we are trying to define one model as A, and the value of this model is being bind to the view H1 basically. So this was the architecture that we are discussed. So we are in this code, we are not using any kind of controller, but basically a full-fledged, you can say, the AngularJS application has three components: controller, view, and model. As far as the first code what we are written, in that case we have only used view and model basically. So as per this application, what we have done, we are defined one, you can say, the view model as A, and the value of the model we are trying to render inside the view, okay, without using controller basically. And if you see in this code again, the actual execution of your script starts with the ng app. So ng app is nothing but the starting point of your execution, where your AngularJS application is going to start basically. And then what is the value you are trying to enter inside the text box will be get assigned to the model, and then that value of the model we are trying to render inside the view. So this was the first application of the AngularJS, and so we'll stop here itself. So in the next lecture, we'll be trying to see what is you can say a one-way data binding and what is a two-way data binding inside the Angular JS. So thanks for today's session. Thank you.